is Black Man Spy.
Hi, this is Malcolm Nance, and welcome to Black Man Spy. Now hear this. I absolutely cannot believe the travesty that is going on in Washington, D.C. right now. If you haven't heard, a few days ago, 6 elected representatives from the U.S. Senate and from the House of Representatives, all of whom were veterans of the intelligence community or the armed forces, made a pretty benign video where they reminded members of the armed forces that you are not obligated to follow illegal orders. Now, this is par for the course. We get this briefing every time we go overseas, every time there's an operation. This is why the armed forces has lawyers assigned to it in the Judge Advocate General Corps to remind men and women of the armed forces to not do anything which would bring shame to themselves, dishonor to the armed forces, and which would expose them to war crimes or illegal activities. Now, most of us may remember, if you're my age, that during the Vietnam War, there was an incident called the My Lai incident, in which Lieutenant William Calley and his unit executed between 350 men, women, and children, overwhelmingly women, children, and elderly, as there were virtually no military-aged men in that sector. Lieutenant Calley said that he was given orders to kill everyone there and wipe out everything that moved and waste them. So he set about ordering his junior officers and sergeants to do just that. Man, woman, and child. There are photographs from that incident where they had the women and children before and then in piles of dead bodies after. This tragedy, which was avoidable, which was absolutely avoidable, set the pace for how the U.S. Armed Forces would do business right up until this week. Now, these members of Congress who have the right to say what they want through the speech and debate clause and the right as American citizens to express their First Amendment rights were immediately accused by President Trump of treason, sedition, and encouraged that they be executed. Now, this has never happened in the history of the United States. Never has a president of the United States gone after members of the armed forces of an opposing party and called for their execution. Why? Because they literally read the exact words in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. But Donald Trump and his staff immediately spun it around that they were telling the members of the armed forces not to follow any orders from the president, which is a lie. And this is the problem with news media. They want to both sides this story. I am telling you, as a senior enlisted who has spent his entire life defending this nation in a family that has spent a century and a half consistently defending the United States, that this is a lie. The president is lying, and sure enough, right after that, his Secretary of War, which, by the way, changing the name from the Department of Defense to the Department of War, was an illegal order, because that is an act of Congress that was done in the 1940s, and you can't just spend $1 billion to change the name so it would look like you're a cool bro. The Secretary of War announced that he was going to carry out an investigation of the retired Captain Kelly. Captain Kelly, as you might recall, is a freaking astronaut, Navy combat pilot, 38 combat missions in Operation Desert Storm, test pilot, flies a multitude of aircraft, and spent multiple periods in space. And Secretary Hegseth said he was going to have him investigated. And then Donald Trump jumps back in again, calling for his execution. Now, even if you wanted to carry out an investigation, Captain Kelly is retired. Pete Hegseth says he's going to recall him to active duty, a thing which has only been carried out 30 times in our history, and mainly for people who had committed real crimes, and bring him back into uniform and prosecute him. Immediately, the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States immediately prejudiced everyone who would have to bring him up for a court-martial if that's what's going to happen. We're at a point where the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense have lost their goddamn minds. Is there no senior enlisted anywhere near them who would say, I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, I know you got a lot of officers around here, but have you lost your fucking mind? This means that you will do this to all of your political enemies who serve this nation faithfully. I swear to fucking God, this cannot keep going on. Either Donald Trump is mentally deranged and unfit, and the people below him, if they're willing to carry this out, they will carry out orders to execute civilians. They're already doing it. In fact, it could be argued quite legally that the attacks on these small boats in the Caribbean, which have killed over 83 people thus far, civilians, are murder. Because we're not at war. We are not in a state of armed conflict. They are not combatants by any definition. And you cannot go around, point to boats in the Caribbean Sea and say everyone there is a terrorist and we have the right to kill them, as if they were members of Al-Qaeda or ISIS, which we do have an authorization of use of military force from after 9/11. So there have already been illegal orders issued by this president. Changing the name to the Department of War is one of them. Just one. We are in a very dangerous place as a nation. And I am saying this to you not just as a veteran. I'm saying this as an American citizen exercising my First Amendment right to say any goddamn thing I want. But I will tell you right now, I am a retired senior chief petty officer. It is incumbent upon me as a senior enlisted to make sure that my chain of command, the people who would be under me, would have confidence in what I say. Not that I am now seen by at least half of the armed forces as having lost my fucking mind. Because if they will stand up for this, that means whatever happens in this upcoming war with Venezuela that they seem to be hell-bent on having means that they are willing to turn a blind eye to illegal actions. Like the 2005 Haditha Dam massacre, when 8 Marines went in and summarily executed 25 Iraqi civilians, mainly women and children, because one of their Marines was killed in an IED attack. The senior enlisted, the staff sergeant, gave them orders to execute them, and they carried it out. That was just recently. That was just 20 years ago. I don't have to go 50, 60 years back to the Vietnam War. We are not the Nazis. We do not just obey orders. We are here and have been given to us through the Uniform Code of Military Justice the right to analyze, understand what is a lawful order and what is not. If they tell you to go clean the latrine, that's a lawful order. If they tell you to do your job and maintain good order and discipline throughout the ship or the command, that is a lawful order. If they tell you to go to the weapons magazine, set a fire to see what will happen if the magazine flooding system will start or if the ship will explode, that is an unlawful order. If they tell you to shoot American citizens, which, by the way, the first thing that you have to defend in the Uniform Code of Military Justice is the rights of American citizens and the Constitution of the United States, not the president, not the officers appointed above you when they give an unlawful order. Obey every other order ever given. Let me tell you guys something that I'm sure has been lost in the news media. People ignore orders in the armed forces of the United States every day. When they're told to be up, be on time, and be at their place of assignment, and they oversleep because they drank the night before, they're brought up on Article 92 charges and they are adjudicated. They are given the opportunity to unscrew themselves or put out of the service. But that's very different than someone coming up to you and saying, "Hey, listen, man, we have really open, loose rules of engagement, so you can shoot and kill whoever you want, and we'll have your back." That is an unlawful order. And the members of the armed forces aren't stupid. This is not the army of Vietnam, which was mainly conscripts. And even though they are mainly people who had morality, many atrocities happened in Vietnam. And that is why we have been training nonstop every day since the Vietnam War ended in 1975, that you have an obligation to not follow an illegal order. You're standing in Lafayette Square, you're a guardsman, they tell you to lock and load your weapon and shoot the civilians in front of you. Illegal order. Don't follow it. Immediately follow the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Turn around to whoever gave you that order and said, "Sir, are you telling me to shoot American citizens?" And if they clarify and say, "No, you misheard me, I want you to go pick up trash," then you're in a safe space. If they carry it out and they say, "Yes, I'm telling you to shoot those American citizens, I'm telling you to shoot innocent civilians, I'm telling you to gun down everybody in that boat because I think that they're drug smugglers, and I have no evidence of that," in a fishing zone, you need to think about what's going to happen. There is more dishonor in being a murderer. There is more dishonor than being a person who will look at the officer behind him and say, "Well, I was just following orders," and execute women and children. That happened in World War II a lot. And it was the Nazis, the Soviets, the North Koreans, the North Vietnamese who carried out these orders. But we have Americans that have carried out these atrocities too. The Mahmoudiyah massacre, which occurred in Iraq, in which 4 soldiers, a sergeant, ordered his other men to come out with him to rape a girl, murder her family, and then execute her and set her on fire and try to make it look like the terrorists did it. These things happen because when you have a command climate that says, "Hey man, I don't care, do what you got to do," you get Abu Ghraib, where they tortured people in Saddam's torture prisons. The honor and dignity of the United States is at stake in this debate. And you know what it really has opened it up to? Why is Donald Trump and the Secretary of Defense hell-bent on not having this issue discussed? Because in their minds, they are going to carry out activities that may likely violate the Uniform Code of Military Justice and, more importantly, the Constitution of the United States. We are a moral armed forces, those of us who have served and those who want to serve and those who are serving. But now people are trying to decide whether their political leanings, which means they favor Trump, will determine what they'll do. If they think that they have their back, they could get away with anything. And as we've seen, Donald Trump has pardoned war criminals who were convicted by the military of executing their captives. We had an Army officer who murdered men in the field. And in both instances, the other soldiers and sailors came and turned them in because what they did was a crime. Trump pardoned those murderers because he thinks it looks tough. This man dodged the draft 5 times. We are in a dark place in the United States. And we're going to keep updating this. But as of now, the honor of this nation is at stake. We have Great Britain now is saying they will not cooperate with us in intelligence sharing off of Venezuela because they believe what we are doing is called extrajudicial killings, aka murder. What can I say that will make you understand any further? This is as simple as this. When we were carrying out the torture of Al Qaeda prisoners, and I went to Congress and testified that it was torture, I was called one day by a Marine general who told me, he said, "Hey, listen, that retired senior chief, you know, his sergeant major told him, that retired senior chief, he's got it right, General. Right is right and wrong is wrong. We do not go out of our way to commit crimes and do evil. And that's what the Uniform Code of Military Justice is for." Let's ponder this a little more, and I'll be talking more about it. And in case we invade Venezuela in the next few days over Thanksgiving turkey, we're going to have a lot more to discuss. Thanks for coming.